Hey everybody, welcome to the Calitraveler podcast show. I'm your host, Paul. Once again, welcome to the Calitraveler podcast show. I'm your host, Paul. Welcome to episode 12 of the Calitraveler podcast show. Before we get started with this week's topic, I want to give a shout out to my listeners on Spotify. So on this app that I use called Anchor.fm to distribute my podcast, they gave me, from Spotify, it's called Rap for Podcasters. So they gave me about my listeners that listen via Spotify. And the Calitraveler podcast show is heard in over 3 countries, US, Thailand, and Philippines. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you to my American audience, kapung krap to my Thai audience, and salamat po to my Filipino audience. So episode 12 will be based on a 3-part throwback series of my travels from 2019. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic that hit in 2020, my travel plans were unfortunately scrapped, and I was going to talk about my travels from this year, but since obviously COVID happened, we're going to talk about my 2019 travels in a 3-part series. So the first place that I went to outside of Thailand in 2019 was Malaysia. So I ended up going to Johor Bahru in Malaysia for over 10 days in February of 2019. Never been to Malaysia. I got invited there, had the opportunity, and I took it. I remember leaving Bangkok at nighttime and getting on the plane. I was flying out of Don Mueang Airport, which is the second largest airport in the entire country. So I ended up getting on the plane. I flew with Air Asia. If you're in Asia, I always recommend flying places via Air Asia. It is extremely affordable. In US dollars, my ticket to Johor Bahru was around like $86 US. And in the US, you can't find a flight for that cheap. So I get on the plane. It's about a 2-hour flight from Bangkok to Johor Bahru, and I get there late at night. And the first thing I did as soon as I left the airport, which when you're at the airport, just an FYI for my listeners that are US citizens, you do not need a visa to visit Malaysia as a tourist. So on average, they give you a stamp for about 60 days. Actually, the visa stamp is for 90 days as a tourist, so you can stay in Malaysia for up to 3 months. Well, spent 10 days in Johor Bahru. The first night after I got out of the airport, I went and I got some nasi goreng. Nasi goreng is Malaysian style fried rice, which is also in Indonesia as well too. Nasi goreng just means fried rice, and it was absolutely amazing. After that, went to my hotel and I passed out. I was so tired. Wake up the next morning and it was time to go and explore Johor Bahru. There's a lot of things to do in Johor Bahru. Now, Johor Bahru is on the southern tip of the Malaysian peninsula. So there's 2 parts of Malaysia. So you have West Malaysia, which is the peninsula where all the major cities like Kuala Lumpur, Putrajaya, Johor Bahru, Malacca are all at. And then you have in the east Malaysia, which would be the states of Sarawak and Sabah. And that is on the island of Borneo. And Malaysia borders to the south Indonesia, and in the north it borders the country of Brunei. So the first day, I'm driving in the car and I'm going to see the city center, and I see a couple of places. I go to a couple of masjid or mosques. I went to the Sultan Iskandar Mosque, and then as well as the Abu Bakr Mosque, which is one of the oldest mosques in Johor Bahru. It was built in the late 1800s. Then I went out to the waterfront, enjoyed the beautiful view, and you can see Singapore from Johor Bahru. So in the perspective, driving to Singapore from Johor Bahru is like going from Oakland to San Francisco. It's about a 20 to 30 minute drive depending on traffic and depending on the time to get through Singaporean immigration. However, I didn't cross into Singapore at that time. And then the next day, after resting and doing some sightseeing, ended up getting in the car and went on a 3-day trip. Went to Putrajaya and Kuala Lumpur. Putrajaya is the capital of Malaysia, even though it's technically Kuala Lumpur, but the administrative capital is Putrajaya. All the government offices are there. They were moved there from Kuala Lumpur in 1999. And the founder of Putrajaya is former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, or Prime Minister Muhammad Mahathir. Then went to Kuala Lumpur, experienced Chinese New Year at the Kuala Lumpur City Center. So much fun there, but it was so crowded on that day. I ended up having, for dinner at that time, I had tandoori chicken. So the one cool thing about Malaysia is there's a lot of different types of foods. So you have a blend of Bumi Putra Malay. Bumi Putra are the ethnic Malays that are originally from Malaysia. And then you have a mixture of Chinese foods and Indian foods as well, which is just amazing. And you put all three of those styles together, it makes an amazing combination of food. And then that night, I ended up going to a park. I ended up going to a theme park called iCity Theme Park. And again, it was during Chinese New Year. It was very crowded and was absolutely amazing. And then the next morning, I ended up driving back to Johor Bahru from Kuala Lumpur. Took an average of about 4 hours on the road. I ended up taking a different route. I went through the city of Klang. And the cool thing for all of my listeners who are Muslim that listen to my podcast, just letting you know that everywhere in Malaysia they have musalla or prayer room. In Bahasa Malay, they call it surau, S-U-R-A-U, and they're everywhere. They have surau at rest stops, they have surau at gas stations, at the malls. So when it's time to pray, you don't ever have to worry about walking too far to find a mosque. You can go to any surau. Ended up getting back to Johor Bahru, spent a few days there, and then it was finally time to go home. I remember going home, and it was about a 2-hour flight. It was at nighttime. I was exhausted that day. And when you get through Thai immigration, it's about a 30 to 40 minute wait. But after that, just get on a taxi and then head home. But some travel tips that I have for you if you're going to be traveling to Malaysia. Uh, don't be too crazy. I would say dress modest. And what I'm saying is just be respectful of the people, be respectful of the culture. Just do what you can, and I promise you, you'll have an amazing time in Malaysia. Now, next week for part 2, I'm going to be talking about my trip that I took last summer to Mexico. So this is part of the 2019 throwback in substitution for my 2020 trip plans being canceled. Podcast can be heard weekly on my YouTube channel, so subscribe to Calitraveler 93, as well as liking my Facebook page, Calitraveler 93, and the podcast will be available on Spotify and other platforms.